My name is Clara, and I'm about to tell you a story that starts with me sitting in my tiny apartment, staring at the email on my laptop screen. It's not just any email, it's the kind of message that makes your blood run cold and your heart race all at once. The subject line reads, Annual bonus allocation, final notification. My hands tremble as I open it, though deep down, I already know what it says. Or rather, what it doesn't say. No bonus for Clara Dawson. Not this year. Not after everything. Let me back up a little so you can understand how we got here. I've been working at Quantix Solutions for 5 years now, a company known for its cutting-edge analytics software used by some of the biggest corporations in the world. We're not flashy like tech giants. Instead, we operate quietly behind the scenes, crunching numbers and spitting out insights that help businesses make smarter decisions. And let me tell you, if data were gold, Quantix would be Fort Knox. I started as an entry-level analyst fresh out of college, eager to prove myself. Over time, I climbed the ranks, not because someone handed me promotions, but because I worked hard, really hard. Late nights, early mornings, weekends spent buried under spreadsheets and algorithms. I gave this job everything I had. By last year, I was leading one of our most important projects, developing a new predictive modeling tool that could revolutionize client strategies. This wasn't just another feature update, it was groundbreaking stuff. Groundbreaking enough that when it launched successfully 6 months ago, clients started lining up, contracts were signed, and revenue soared. And who do you think spearheaded every step of that project? Me, Clara Dawson. Alongside my team, yes, but I was the driving force, the one who stayed late perfecting code, troubleshooting bugs, presenting demos to skeptical executives until they couldn't deny the value anymore. Everyone knew it. Even my boss, Richard Langley, admitted, grudgingly, during a board meeting that the success of the project rested heavily on my shoulders. So imagine my shock and fury when Richard called me into his office 2 weeks ago. He sat there behind his polished mahogany desk, looking smug as ever, and told me point blank, Clara, due to unforeseen budget constraints, your annual bonus has been reallocated. Reallocated? That's corporate speak for stolen. Stolen from me, the person whose sweat and tears built something worth millions for this company. At first, I thought he was joking. A cruel joke, sure, but still, surely he wouldn't dare take credit for my work and rob me of the financial reward I'd earned fair and square. But no, he wasn't kidding. In fact, he doubled down. Look, he said, leaning back in his leather chair like some king surveying his kingdom. The company needs flexibility right now. You'll get recognition where it matters, in future opportunities. Future opportunities. What a laughable phrase coming from him. As if dangling vague promises in front of me could soften the blow of outright theft. I left his office, seething, replaying his words over and over in my head. How dare he? How dare he? That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard's self-satisfied smirk. His dismissive tone. The way he acted like stealing my bonus was nothing more than a minor inconvenience for me to shrug off. But what kept me awake wasn't anger, it was something else. Something darker. Revenge. Now, before you judge me too harshly, let me clarify. I'm not the type to seek vengeance lightly. Growing up, I always believed in playing by the rules, trusting systems, and giving people the benefit of the doubt. But this crossed a line. Richard didn't just cheat me out of money. He undermined my dignity, my worth, my identity as someone who contributes meaningfully to this organization. If he thought I'd roll over and accept his betrayal quietly, he was dead wrong. The idea came to me suddenly, fully formed, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. There's a clause in our licensing agreement, a small but critical detail buried deep within paragraphs of legal jargon. Clause 47B, to be exact. It states that any misuse or unethical behavior related to our proprietary software will result in immediate suspension of access to our analytics platform. Without that platform, Quantix's clients are essentially blindfolded. They lose the ability to interpret their own data effectively. For a company whose entire business model revolves around providing actionable insights, losing access to their analytics is akin to pulling the plug on life support. Of course, triggering such a clause isn't something done lightly or without consequences. But as I mulled it over, the pieces began falling into place. Richard hadn't just taken my bonus. He'd also claimed full ownership of the predictive modeling tool, erasing my contributions entirely. according to internal memos circulated last week. He even pitched it to upper management as his brainchild. My tool. My invention. Gone, credited solely to him. If Richard wanted to play dirty, fine. Two could play that game. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The building was eerily quiet, save for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional click-clack of heels echoing down empty hallways. I slipped into my cubicle, booted up my computer, and pulled up the documentation for our licensing agreements. Scrolling through the dense text, I found exactly what I needed. Clause 47B. Its wording was clear, concise, and devastatingly effective. All I had to do was file a formal complaint citing Richard's unethical actions, specifically his misappropriation of intellectual property, and the system would automatically lock down access to our analytics platform across the board. But filing such a complaint required evidence. Solid, undeniable proof that Richard had knowingly misrepresented my work as his own. Fortunately, I'd been meticulous throughout the development process, documenting every stage of the project in painstaking detail. Emails, meeting notes, design drafts, all stored neatly in my personal cloud drive. It took hours to compile everything into a coherent timeline, but by lunchtime I had a dossier that would leave no room for doubt. As I worked, paranoia gnawed at the edges of my mind. What if someone noticed what I was doing? What if Richard caught wind of my plan before I could execute it? To cover my tracks, I alternated between legitimate tasks and my secret mission, answering emails and attending virtual meetings while surreptitiously adding finishing touches to my evidence file. By the end of the day, adrenaline coursed through my veins like liquid fire. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, focused, determined, unstoppable. Before leaving the office, I sent the completed dossier to an external email address, a fail-safe in case anything happened to my work device. Then, with trembling fingers, I initiated the first step of the process, submitting a preliminary inquiry to our legal department. Technically, this flagged the matter for review without triggering immediate action, buying me time to prepare for the fallout. Still, the moment I hit send, a wave of nausea washed over me. There was no turning back now. Over the weekend, I barely slept. Instead, I obsessed over every possible outcome. Would Richard try to retaliate against me personally? Would upper management side with him, dismissing my claims as sour grapes? Worst case scenario, I might lose my job altogether. But even that possibility didn't deter me. If I walked away from Quantix tomorrow, at least I'd walk away knowing I fought back, knowing I stood up for myself when it mattered most. Monday morning arrived too quickly. As I stepped off the elevator onto our floor, the usual buzz of activity greeted me. Colleagues chatting by the coffee machine, phones ringing in the distance, keyboards clacking in rhythmic unison. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. For a brief moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing. If perhaps Richard's betrayal had been less malicious and more misunderstanding. Then I saw him. Richard stood near the break room, laughing with a group of senior managers. His tie was loosened slightly, sleeves rolled up, an image of effortless confidence. Catching sight of me, he raised a hand in greeting, flashing that same infuriating smile. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to nod politely before retreating to my desk, pretending nothing was amiss. By mid-morning, whispers began circulating. Someone must have leaked news of my inquiry, because suddenly everyone seemed to know something was brewing. Co-workers shot me curious glances, and hushed conversations trailed off whenever I approached. Normally, I hated being the center of attention, but today I embraced it. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. They'd find out soon enough. Around noon, I received an email summoning me to a meeting with HR and Richard later that afternoon. My pulse quickened as I read the message. This was it, the moment of truth. Part of me wanted to march straight into that conference room and confront Richard head-on, laying out my evidence in excruciating detail. Another part, the rational, cautious part, urged me to wait. Timing was everything, and I needed to ensure my cards were perfectly aligned before making my move. For the rest of the day, I played the role of dutiful employee, attending meetings and responding to requests as though nothing unusual was happening. Inside, however, I was a storm of conflicting emotions. Fear, anger, anticipation, hope, each feeling vied for dominance, threatening to overwhelm me at any moment. Yet beneath it all, there was a quiet resolve, a certainty that I was doing the right thing, no matter the cost. When the appointed hour finally arrived, I gathered my notes and headed to the conference room. Richard was already seated at the far end of the table, flanked by two HR representatives. Their expressions were neutral, unreadable masks that gave nothing away. Taking a deep breath, I slid into the chair opposite Richard and placed my folder on the table. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched taut, heavy with unspoken tension. "Thank you for joining us, Clara," one of the HR reps began, breaking the spell. Her voice was calm, professional, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "We understand you've raised concerns regarding certain practices within the company. Care to elaborate?" This was it, my opening. Clutching the edge of the table for support, I opened my folder and began to speak. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, but I reminded myself why I was here. This wasn't just about a stolen bonus. It was about justice, integrity, and standing up for what was right, even if it meant risking everything. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What I'm about to present isn't easy to discuss, but it's necessary. Over the past several months, I've led the development of our predictive modeling tool, a project that has significantly impacted Quantic's solution success. However, recent events have forced me to question whether my contributions are being acknowledged fairly." Richard shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering slightly. He glanced at the HR reps, as if expecting them to dismiss my words outright. But they remained silent, their faces unreadable. I continued, pulling out printed emails and documentation from my folder. "These are records of every stage of the project's development. You'll see detailed notes, meeting transcripts, and correspondence clearly showing my role, not only as the leader of this initiative, but also as its primary architect. Yet, when the project launched successfully, credit was redirected entirely to Richard." I paused, letting the gravity of my statement sink in. One of the HR reps leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Clara, can you clarify what you mean by credit was redirected?" "Certainly," I replied, sliding a copy of an internal memo across the table. This memo, sent to senior management last week, explicitly attributes the creation of the predictive modeling tool to Richard Langley. Not only does this misrepresent the truth, but it also violates company policy regarding intellectual property and attribution. Richard cleared his throat, attempting to interject. "Now, hold on a second." The other HR representative held up a hand, silencing him. "Let Clara finish." "Thank you," I said, nodding. "But this isn't just about recognition. It's about accountability. 2 weeks ago, Richard informed me that my annual bonus had been reallocated due to budget constraints. Coincidentally, or perhaps not so coincidentally, this decision came shortly after the project's successful rollout. When I questioned him further, he made it clear that my efforts would be rewarded in future opportunities rather than financially. Meanwhile, he positioned himself as the sole innovator behind the tool, presumably securing both financial and professional benefits for himself. The room fell silent again, save for the faint rustle of papers as the HR reps reviewed the documents I'd provided. Richard's confidence seemed to waver, his earlier bravado replaced by thinly veiled discomfort. Finally, one of the HR reps spoke. "Richard, do you have anything to say in response to these allegations?" He hesitated, then forced a laugh. "Look, Clara's done great work, no doubt about it, but she's exaggerating her role here. As her manager, I oversaw the entire project. Without my guidance, none of this would have happened." "That's not accurate," I countered firmly. "Your involvement was minimal at best. In fact, I pulled out another document, this one detailing specific instances where Richard had dismissed or overridden my team's recommendations, only to later claim those ideas as his own. Here's proof of multiple occasions where your interference actually hindered progress. My team and I worked tirelessly to overcome those obstacles, not because of your leadership, but in spite of it." The tension in the room thickened palpably. Richard's face reddened, and for the first time I saw cracks in his polished facade. He stammered, searching for a rebuttal, but nothing coherent came out. At last, the HR reps exchanged a glance before turning back to us. "We'll need some time to review all of this information," one of them said. In the meantime, we expect full cooperation from both parties moving forward. Understood? We both nodded, though Richard looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. As we left the conference room, he shot me a glare filled with barely contained rage. But I didn't flinch. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. Whether or not HR sided with me, I knew I'd planted seeds of doubt that couldn't easily be ignored. Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my laptop screen once more. A new email had appeared in my inbox, an automated notification confirming that my formal complaint had triggered Clause 47B. Effective immediately, access to Quantic Solutions' analytics platform had been suspended pending further investigation. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Relief, fear, satisfaction, guilt. I hadn't intended to pull the trigger quite yet, but knowing the clause had activated gave me a strange sense of vindication. If Richard thought he could manipulate the system without consequence, he was wrong. Dead wrong. Over the next few days, chaos erupted within Quantix. Clients flooded the company with panicked inquiries, demanding answers for why their data pipelines had suddenly gone dark. Meetings were called, emergency plans drafted, and fingers pointed in every direction. Richard became public enemy number one, scrambling to explain how his unethical actions had jeopardized the company's reputation and bottom line. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, continuing to perform my duties while preparing for whatever came next. Upper management eventually summoned me for a private meeting, during which they expressed regret for the situation and assured me that corrective measures were underway. While I appreciated their acknowledgement, part of me wondered if it was too little, too late. In the end, Richard was demoted, stripped of his title and responsibilities. His once unshakable empire crumbled beneath the weight of his own hubris. As for me, I stayed at Quantix for now. Though the experience left scars, it also taught me invaluable lessons about resilience, courage, and the importance of advocating for oneself. And as I walked through the office halls, head held high, I couldn't help but smile. Justice may not always be swift or perfect, but sometimes it finds its way. All it takes is one person willing to stand up and say, "Enough."